And I'm going to bet there's people watching this who kind of know what they should do, but don't really want to.
Right.
And I've come across this many, many times.
Yeah.
I've come across people who are, look, I know such and such a thing, and it's really good, and it's what I should be doing, but I don't really want to. What should I do about that? Because a person who wants to do what they're meant to do, a person who wants what they need, is a very fortunate person, karmically fortunate person.
Yeah.
And I've said to such questioners, well, look, actually, I've got good news for you, which is that actually you do want to do it. You just don't realize it yet.
Yes.
Your higher self wants it. If it's what you're meant to do, your higher self wants it, because we don't talk much about soul repression on earth. We talk about sexual repression, mental repression, emotional repression, and so on, but not soul repression. The soul is yearning out, the soul that determined our destiny before we were born is yearning for us, within us, to do what we're meant to be doing. And it's only a question of becoming in tune with that.
The Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence, where politics is not the answer, materialism counts for nothing, and spirituality will set you free.
Great to be here with you, Richard.
Good to be with you, Darren.
So I've got a pretty interesting one here. I think this will be a...
I've got no idea what you've got for me.
This is a deep point, I think, and I was really glad to see it. So this person says, jokes aside, is everything really predetermined, like how we die, our life plan, people we meet, etc.? And I thought this was a great, and they say, I want to know the truth. And I thought this was a great intro to kind of conversation about free will and destiny. I think everyone thinks about, whether it's all written or whether
I like the jokes aside.
Yeah, as if...
Tell us the jokes, come on.
Yeah. As if but people do think about this, don't they? It's like, do we have agency or is it all already written? And if it's already written, then what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So maybe we can start this conversation here about how we reconcile fate and free will. I think that's what
I had this thing once, which is, your destiny is written, but you are the editor.
All right, that's it.
But it's a bit more than the editor, actually. So, sorry, ask your question.
No, I mean, that's it, isn't it? It's like, maybe what's the most helpful way to look at this, I guess? People trying to reconcile this question about, does it matter what I do in life? Do I really have a choice, or is it already predetermined in some way? Yeah,
I mean, first of all, let's look at how we are born. I'll tell you an interesting thing. It's slightly off topic. But I've found, it's just a finding that I've come across, that people who are very spiritually inclined will sometimes have an astrological sun sign, and it's only a sun sign, and I'm no astrologer. Chrissy Blaze would know about this. Yeah. But that really doesn't suit their character at all. They might be say they might be a Leo, and yet they're a very retiring, etc. Or they might be... an Aries, and yet there might be a Pisces, which is associated with a more emotional sort of person, and they're not at all emotional, or etc. And it's meant to, people take sun signs to determine character to a degree, I believe. Yeah. And I've sort of come to the conclusion, it is relevant to this question, that often a more advanced person, a person who's really taking to the spiritual path, will be more inclined to take a testing path, a path that they need, as opposed to the path that really suits them. There used to be an old thing in the old days that you should choose the path that suits you. And I'm even talking in spiritual things. So if you're a more intellectually inclined person, you might take to the path of Gnani Yoga or wisdom. And if you're more of a psychically orientated person, it could be Raja Yoga. And if you really are a person that relates to helping others, then you do Karma Yoga, etc. And now that's no longer applicable. You take the path through which you can do the most good for others. Simple. What you believe is the path you can do the most good for others. Now, to come to your point, we're born, obviously, with certain lessons we need. And human beings very often try to avoid those lessons.
I see, yeah.
They aren't naturally, of the disposition to be the way they're born, let's say. And you can understand why with reincarnation, why that would be. But clearly they've chosen this to learn certain lessons. Most people don't look upon life as a learning experience. They look upon it as, how can I be as happy as possible? And quite commonly, they don't find that. I've come across many people who have crises in their life of one kind or another. Could be mental health, could be physical health, could be something else. And through that crisis, they've told me they have found their destiny.
Yeah, okay.
They were going down the wrong track. It's kind of stopped them in their track. It could even have been a breakdown in certain cases. These people have said this to me,
Yeah.
and they found a spirituality in their life.
Yeah.
Or even through some, physical impairment. Some people have told me it stopped them, and they then found and they're much happier thereafter. So, long-winded answer, but I would say if you can find what you are meant to do, and then do it.
Right.
It really is choose well, stand fast, know God.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. I mean, I can definitely, even see in my own life how there's certain experiences that consciously I wouldn't have wanted them necessarily, but obviously there's some deeper purpose to them, which has helped to bring about a certain realization or lesson. And you're right that we often try to avoid them, but then we also don't necessarily take the lesson, whereas that could be the doorway to our future and our destiny.
Yeah.
And that being the whole point of it in the first place. But so maybe we can go back to what happens before we're born then? Because you've talked about how we there are certain lessons that we need, right?
Yeah.
And so before we're born, I mean, is there like a life plan laid out for us, or are there some choices that we make? What's going on?
There are people who, I believe, I won't say every life, but time and time again, I'm not judging anyone, because all of us have got lessons to learn, and all of us have not learned the lessons through the lives that we were meant to learn. So let's put that out there.
Yeah.
But there are people who, you can't always measure a person's evolution by what state they're in now.
Right.
And by that I mean you can have a person who's like a perfectly respectable, decent person. They're not really making any massive changes to the world. Not much even to the world around them, but at the same time they're on the right side of things, they're behaving honorably, decently, and so on. And yet, you could have a person who's much worse than that, could be a criminal right now, could be a badly behaved person right now, and yet is actually closer to enlightenment because they're capable of change.
I see.
Which comes to your question. We've got to allow ourselves to change.
Yeah.
And life is a changing experience. It's designed, to take our chances. They're not by chance, but the chances that we have created for ourselves in order to change. Take your chance to bring change, and it's all down to our choice. It's all it's change, chance, choice.
Yeah.
But in terms of what we do before we're born, we determine at the soul level, and this is a key thing: the soul level, what experiences we need. And I'm afraid this treads on the toes of some people, certainly not all people, but maybe not most people, but some people's idea of parenthood, because there are a lot of people who think, well, I created my children, or me and my partner. If it hadn't been for us, they wouldn't even exist. They would never have existed. They would never have had life. And that's the greatest thing that I could possibly do, and I've done it. Actually, wrong. They would have had life. You might have been the most wonderful parent, and that's a wonderful thing, and you might have helped them greatly, especially if you've guided them towards their true destiny, then that's a great thing. But if they hadn't found you, I'm sorry to say, they would have found someone else. Sorry for your own sort of feelings of possessiveness, that they would have found somebody else. Because the soul is looking for a certain series of experiences, and the soul isn't going to frame those, by the way. It's way above the as it were, inverted commas, the pay grade of even our souls. There are karmic lords, supreme lords of karma, actually, who frame the experience all life needs in this solar system. And that's governed meticulously, and it will happen. And so there are different ways that an individual can gain the essential experiences they need. But we'll be born with certain abilities, we'll be born with certain things lacking, depending what we need, and it's all framed carefully for us to learn. And, I think that would be a great change if people could put, their own happiness second,
Right.
and learning the lessons first. They'd actually be happier if they did that, strangely.
Yeah, and I think one other thing I think that gives me a sense of like peace as well is that we were participants in that process of choosing the experiences and the lessons that we needed.
Choosing our parents.
Even choosing our parents.
Yeah.
So it's like, no matter what situation we find ourselves in now, it will always benefit us to look for the reason behind it, no matter how difficult or trying. And there are obviously a lot of terrible situations out there.
Yeah.
But it's like, there is always a reason behind it. Ultimately.
There is, no matter how hard, and it really, really is hard to see sometimes. The other thing I think that helps with that is to remember our longevity. I mean, we haven't been here for like 1,000 years. We've been here for numerous millennia, millions of years, evolving, and will continue to evolve. So, although there are terrible things that happen to people, they are, in the total scheme of things, a tiny blip in their total evolution. They may be terrible, then they are terrible. It's just things you can think, how could that ever be required by anybody? You can understand that, and it's difficult to have faith. Some people, though, that I've come across again, who have very difficult experiences to go through, by finding it, by accepting that there's something in this they need, they don't maybe know even what exactly, it's really helped them. Much more than, say, sympathy would help them. Because actually sympathy, even sincerely meant, can actually be debilitating to some people, because it just sort of increases the self-pity element sometimes. If you can try and see, a balance, in a balanced way, sort of a lesson here, a life lesson here, and some of them are terrible. But, look at the people, though, who turn their adversities into advantages. People who've had drug and alcohol problems, or they're recovering now, and then they turn it to a great advantage to help other people with that same problem. One could list off numerous examples.
I always think that's very inspiring when you see someone who's gone through a very difficult trial in their life. They come out of it with a certain level of wisdom and experience that they can offer to people who are struggling in the same way. And that's like the ultimate, expression of learning that lesson and transmuting it and sharing it with others to raise others as well. I think, because we tend to think in a very sort of like punishment mentality, don't we? But karma's not about that at all. And these experiences are not about that at all.
No.
It comes back to these lessons that are essential for our own growth and our own growing in wisdom, really. And like you say, to see this life as just one in a series of millions of lives, even not just millions of years, it's like, all right, so this is a journey that we're on, and this life is one little puzzle piece in this journey, helping me to grow in wisdom in this way, and it's all about our spiritual evolution into this total realization of our
we're lucky again to come back to our core teaching on the Spiritual Freedom Show. We're given the big signposts that we need, and bravery. And there are numerous ways to learn bravery. One of them is to stand up for what you believe, and to let people know what you believe, which can be very difficult, actually, with our closest people in our lives sometimes. And then love, absolutely key. True love, not what people think love is, but real love. And service, of course. If we get those three things, the first three freedoms, into our lives, and of course with service, it isn't even just giving service, because there are numerous ways to serve, and that's very good. It's giving service in the most powerful way, effective way that we can give service. And I think there's a great quote actually from Albert Schweitzer, the great Albert Schweitzer. He says, I don't know, I can't remember it word for word, but I don't know what your destiny is, but one thing I do know, that those who find their way to serve will be, I think he says, the happiest among you, or something like that. And it's true. If we find our way to serve, there's nothing like it. And it can be demanding, it can be difficult, it can be tough, but you know what you're doing, you know why you're doing it. There's that inner feeling of not doing what you're meant to be doing is, I think, one of the most debilitating things. But it's solvable. And then, because people have a destiny, but they can go off course with it. And then, we have to come back to what we are meant to do. That's all destiny should mean, really, doing what we're meant to do.
I think that's it kind of comes back even to the core of this question, isn't it? Because you mentioned like taking our chances, right? And we have these choices. So it implies that there is a choice, and that, we are presented with these different lessons and experiences, but we could go this way or that way. That's so simplistic that there's only two choices. But doesn't that not? Because on the one hand, we talk about God as all and that there's divine will, but on the other hand, we're talking about having, these different chances and choices that we can make through our experience that we have here on earth in each life. So how do we reconcile those two things? Because on the one hand, when you think of divine will, you think, well, it must all be written, certainly, but then you think about our own free will and having choices. That how can there be free will in the context of divine will?
Well, we have free will to make these choices, and as we're told, one of the biggest acts of free will we can take is to give up our free will.
Yeah.
But it still has to be an act of free will.
Right.
And by give up our free will, I mean, not actually do necessarily what we want to do. Now, some people would look at it this way: to do what God wants me to do.
Okay.
And some people would look at it as to do what the Absolute wants me to do. Or some wouldn't even believe in God or the Absolute, but what karma wants me to do, or what life is, what is right for me to do. There's different ways of looking at that, but it's no longer just your free will. You're not just doing what you want because you want to do it. And it's a strange, I am actually, I've been amazed by the lengths some people will go to their own jeopardy to exercise their free will. They'll make decisions which enable them to exercise their free will, but which are really bad for them, obviously bad for them. But I did it. I made my choices, and that's what they want to be able to. It's really inbuilt in the human psyche. It's an advanced step to go beyond that and saying, look, what am I meant to do? What am I here for? And even the highest calling in the world, you won't get up every morning wanting to do it all the time.
Right.
Although, if you're fortunate, I consider myself very fortunate, because I've been working for the Aetherius Society since 1978 full time.
Okay, yeah.
And I still get up in the morning, think, great, I'm going to work for the Aetherius Society.
Yeah.
So that's, not all the time. It's not everything you're doing that you really want to do all the time. No one's like that.
Yeah.
So that's when you're giving up your free will. If it's right, if you're doing the right thing. Another thing I would add to that is some people think that if they're born into a certain way of life, you get people born into crime syndicates, families, or born into drug-ridden families, or whatever it might be. And of course, some of them are able to break free from that, and it's a wonderful thing to see. But you can also get people born into religions who think, well, because I'm born into this religion, that's what I am. No, you're not.
Yeah.
That's what you've been raised as, maybe, and now you have a choice. And some people find that, I think it's partly because they don't care very much, not very important to them. It's far more important to them what house they buy, what car they drive,
right.
and they bother about that. They'll change those things, but they won't bother to change their religion. But I think everyone really is able to make that choice, not even about what they want. I think Dr. King was very clear that he, at the time of his yoga practice period, which was 10 years of 8 hours a day, he actually wasn't looking to serve at that point in his life. He was looking to find samadhi, which he did. Right. And it's jolly good he did, because he used it to serve entirely, really.
Yeah.
He gave up the benefit of it in order to serve later. But he admits that, but he knew he had to, and he had a calling, and he did. And in a tiny way, I was the same. I was going down a certain path, only 18, but I was very intent on going down the Raja Yoga path, and then found the Aetherius Society. I could see immediately this was more important. It was going to help others more. But I wasn't like, at first, oh, great. I'm going to have to give that up then. Yeah. But I actually found that everything I gave up, and far, far, far more, I got anyway through this path.
Yeah, no, that's a great lesson in there, isn't it? So it's like, we do have a choice. That's the bottom line.
We have a choice.
But and it's our responsibility to use that choice to advance, to serve, to choose to serve, to choose to...
And to stay with it. That's the difficult thing. And that's what people, they it's very rare. It's extremely rare. We're going on a pilgrimage, which everyone's invited to Holston Down, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of that of the start of Operation Prayer Power in that location. We're going on June the 25th, and we'll have a lot of people there, and everybody's absolutely welcome to come. And among the people coming, there's a number of people who were there 50 years ago.
Wow, yeah.
Not a big number. I'm going to guess it's going to be in the region of about 10 of the people who come will have actually been there 50 years ago. But those 10 people have stuck to that course in, I think, pretty well ever since, every week pretty much. Wow. Continuing that path. It's a very rare thing for people to stay with any path. And of course, if you're on the wrong path, you shouldn't stay with it. But if it's the right path, that's not enough to make the right choice. You've got to stay with it all the way through to the conclusion, which is to know God.
Yeah, and that's not even necessarily one life, is it?
And even then, you've got to carry on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's what we learn in the book, isn't it? That's what we learn in there. So we're choosing almost to give up our free will in order to advance, to become closer to God, and we're doing that over life after life after life, not just to the point of realization, but until total amalgamation back with.
I mean, you talk about the book, and one of the things that amazed Dr. King, it really did surprise him, is that other teachers, including prominent theosophists and others, don't teach a concept of what you do after you gain enlightenment or nirvana. And I actually think it could be very, very difficult and quite shocking to someone who does enter. I know we're leaping ahead here with nirvana, but the ultimate state of samadhi, whatever you want to call it, the bliss state, so on, total absorption in God or in Brahma. They are led to believe in the old teaching that once you get there, you amalgamated back with divinity. And I think some of those who went down that path must have had a period of adjustment to make at some stage. I don't know. I haven't been there. I haven't done that yet. But we are prepared in this teaching. There's a whole concept here which you don't find, and Dr. King was surprised by this really, in other teachings of gaining an enlightened state, even beyond Nirvana. This book, The Nine Freedoms, these teachings go beyond even that. And then coming out of it, coming down from it in order to serve. And you get it throughout creation, as a matter of fact, all the way through creation. Intelligences who don't need for their own sake. Even the avatars who've come to Earth didn't do so for their karmic benefit. Right. That's the difference between them and us. And that's, in a way, the good thing, actually, about our destiny. And particularly, strange as it may sound, some of the tests, is that through those, we are burning up our karma. We're getting closer to divinity.
Yeah, I mean, this last point you said there about closer to divinity is interesting because, if we see that everything happens within this framework of divine will, even our own choices, then it sort of causes us to contemplate on the unity between us and God, how one we are with the divine. That it's not so much do we have free will or is it all predetermined by God in the beginning. Is that we are God making these choices, and that it is, and therefore to contemplate also on our responsibility with what we do with those choices. Yeah. And it starts to, the real question I think then starts to emerge, which is not so much is it free will or fate, but more what are the choices that you are going to make in the course of your life in order to advance towards God.
Exactly. And I'm going to bet there's people watching this who kind of know what they should do, but don't really want to.
Right.
And I've come across this many, many times. Yeah. I've come across people who are like, I know such and such a thing, and it's really good, and it's what I should be doing, but I don't really want to. What should I do about that? Because a person who wants to do what they're meant to do, a person who wants what they need, is a very fortunate person, karmically fortunate person. Yeah. And I've said to such questioners, well, look, actually, I've got good news for you. which is that actually you do want to do it. You just don't realize it yet.
Yes.
Your higher self wants it. If it's what you're meant to do, your higher self wants it, because we don't talk much about soul repression on earth. We talk about sexual repression, mental repression, emotional repression, and so on, but not soul repression. The soul is yearning out, the soul that determined our destiny before we were born is yearning for us, within us, to do what we're meant to be doing. And it's only a question of becoming in tune with that. And I say only, that's quite a step.
Yes,
and who can claim we're always in tune with it? But there's that wonderful, for those who've ever heard of the New Lord's Prayer, there's a wonderful statement in it, which is, never again will I turn from my inner vision of you. That's a request made by the person praying. And that must be possible, or the Master Jesus who gave that prayer wouldn't have included it. And so that we have that as an aspiration. If we can then, through spiritual practices, through study, and definitely through experience, if we continue with it, we'll get closer and closer to soul attunement. And then when we have it, we'll want to do what we're born to do.
I think that's a fantastic message to end on. That is what we're doing. It's attuning ourselves with our soul in that way. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Darren.
Hey everybody, it's Darren here. Thanks for tuning into the show. Now, if you enjoyed that episode, don't forget to subscribe for more wisdom from the 9 Freedoms. If you'd like to find out more about the 9 Freedoms, about Mars Sector 6 by Dr. George King, go to our website, that's aetherius.org. Richard and I love hearing from you, receiving your comments, your questions on your spiritual experiences, and talking about them on the show. So do write to us, share them with us at spiritualfreedom@richardlawrence.co.uk. Always remember that service is the jewel in the rock of attainment. See you next time.